Peace, peace, peace. What it is, it's your brother Tyvon Swain L, aka the Orthodox Moor. Real quick, I want to wish a happy birthday to brother Malcolm X, aka El Haj Malik El Shabazz. That's this is my guy right here. Noble Drew Ali is my prophet. Um, I also considered Marcus Garvey his forerunner, um, but a personal hero of mine is Malcolm X. Um, I've studied Malcolm X a lot longer than I've ever studied the prophet. I probably would have never found Noble Drew Ali's teachings had I never ever uh, ran into to to speeches and videos and movies made about Malcolm X. I'm 36 years old, about to turn 37 this year. Um, a couple of big things that were big in my coming up were the Spike Lee movie about Malcolm X, and then also the Million Man March, kind of like bringing a reawareness of Malcolm X. Um, and so during that time period, I got really intrigued at things I heard Malcolm say. Um, I went back and researched his speeches. I've gone back and seen every interview I can of Brother Malcolm on YouTube and whatnot. And there's a lot of things in his personal history and story that I connected with. Um, and when I read his biography um, by Alex Haley and whatnot, there was something in there that I found intriguing that it didn't stand out to me till after I actually joined the temple. And I'm no longer with the Moorish Temple of America, but in 2015 I proclaimed nationality in the Moorish Temple of America. Um, and while I was in the temple, I was studying, and and I went back and studied some things from Malcolm. Some things jumped out at me. I didn't know he spoke about the Moors, and not only did he speak about the Moors, he spoke about the Moors in a very very interesting, fascinating way. Um, so as a birthday tribute to my brother, um, and on some nerd type stuff, I'm gonna break down three passages that I read from Brother Malcolm that really shaped how I see things currently. And let me say, I'm grateful for passages that I'm grateful for because when I read Brother Malcolm and I go back and check out his work, uh, the sacrifice that he put down for his people, the blood, the sweat, the tears, the emotion, the literal sacrifice of his life. Um, I feel like when people do things like that, you gotta really to pay homage to them. You really got to study what they do and what they're about. And I feel like a lot of people when they study Malcolm, they do it at a surface level. They really do it at a surface level. So this is for my Moorish brothers. This is for my non-Moorish brothers. This is for my people who are Pan-Africanist, nationalist, what have you. Um, but these are just a couple of little jewels that I found from Brother Malcolm, and one I was even given by a former sheik. Um, so shout out to you. You know who you are. Um, but yeah, I found these to be very, very interesting and very, very, very fascinating on the message that he speaks about whenever he speaks about the Moors. But without further ado, family, I'm gonna jump right into it. Malcolm X, nationalism, and his message to sleeping Moors. What Brother Malcolm had to say about Moors. So in his autobiography of Malcolm X, page 213, um, you can find this excerpt. This is circa 1950 while he's incarcerated, and I do believe this is prior to him being in the Nation of Islam. I gotta double check that, but I can't recall anything that jumps out at me that he was in the nation at this time. I know he joined. I know uh, he officially had joined and was out in parole in '52 and was doing things with them, etc. and whatnot. However, at this juncture, I'm not sure that he was with them or not because he was incarcerated from I believe 46 to 52, etc. Um, But yeah, I found this to be interesting. He was while he was in prison, incarcerated. It's well known that he would at a certain point that he started reading a whole bunch of stuff. Um, and while he would read, in the biography, you'll see that he likes to debate people, etc. And so in that kind of a time frame, he says this: in a debate about whether or not Homer had ever existed, I threw into those white faces the theory that Homer only symbolized how white Europeans kidnapped black Africans, then blinded them so they could never get back their own people. Homer and Omar and Moor, you see, are related terms. It's like saying Peter, Pedro, and Petra, all three of which means rock. These blinded Moors, the European taught to sing about the Europeans' glorious accomplishments. Now, I found that to be a fascinating concept when I read that. Because the first time I read that, let me say, I was aware of Moors, right? Before I joined the temple in 2015. I read this years and years and years ago. This biography, right? Um, and I was aware of the Moors in the sense of like the play Othello, or like the Robin Hood Prince of Thieves character, um, uh, a couple other characters in history, etc. You know what I'm saying? The Morgan Freeman played the character I was talking about in Robin Hood Prince of Thieves. Um, Azim, I believe his name is. Um, but I didn't know. And again, many Moorish characters in Shakespeare plays, right? Like again, there's Othello, there's Castaban, the Moor, there's his mother, the witch, or Caliban, excuse me, Castaban, Caliban, excuse me. Um, there's a bunch of Moorish characters in Shakespeare plays, right? I'm a nerd. I like to read that kind of stuff. So I knew who Moors were the first time I read this. So I knew it was generally talking about African people. And when you read Shakespeare and stuff in history, Moor is it's just a general. It seems to be like a general term when you read it, when you first run across it, or like how I was taught it in school, etc. Right? When I'm reading Shakespeare and whatnot. Um, and so when the first time I read this, I was like, okay, he's just talking about black people, like kidnap Africans. Got it, coach. Um, but when I joined the temple, that stood out to me in a whole different way, because I read the term that stood out to me after I joined the temple was these blinded Moors that the Europeans taught to sing about the Europeans' glorious accomplishments. Um, he goes on to this same concept right here about being blinded by the Europeans and singing about their accomplishments. He goes on to speak on even further after he joins the NOI. So in 1963, while he's still with the NOI, he breaks down this same concept in a Playboy magazine interview. Y'all can go find this stuff anywhere. Like everything I'm saying is public domain stuff. You can find all this stuff on the internet. So in 1963, in part of the interview, he says Christ wasn't white. Christ was a black man. Okay, Christ wasn't white. Christ was a black man. Going like talking about this blinded Moors concept, being taught to sing about Europeans' accomplishments, right? And so Playboy asked back, on what scripture do you base this assertion? Malcolm says, sir, Billy Graham has made the same statement in public. Why not ask him what scripture he found it in? When Pope Pius the 12th died, Life magazine carried a picture of him in his private study kneeling before a black Christ. What was the source of their information? All white people who have studied history and geography know that Christ was a black man. Only the poor, brainwashed American Negro has been made to believe that Christ was white, to maneuver him into worshiping the white man. After becoming a Muslim in prison, I read almost everything I could put my hands on in the prison library. I began to think back on everything I had read, and especially with the histories, I realized that nearly all of them read by the general public have been made into white histories. I found out that the history whitening process either had left out great things that black men had done, or some of the great black men uh, uh, had gotten whitened. And so Playboy asked in return, would you list a few of these men? And so this is what Malcolm says when he's asked to list some of the men that have been whitened through history. He responds, well, Hannibal, The most successful general that ever lived was a black man. So was Beethoven. Beethoven's father was one of the Blackamoors. I should have highlighted that. He was one of the Blackamoors that hired themselves out in Europe as professional soldiers. Haydn, Beethoven's teacher, was of African descent, and Solomon, great biblical characters, etc. Columbus, the discoverer of America, was a half black man, whose whole black empires, like the Moorish, have been whitened to hide the fact that a great black empire had conquered a white empire even before America was discovered. The Moorish civilization, black Africans, conquered and ruled Spain. They kept the light burning in southern Europe. The word Moor means black, by the way. I'm going to read that last part again. Whole black empires like the Moorish have been whitened to hide the fact that a great black empire had conquered a white empire even before America was discovered. The Moorish civilizations, black Africans, conquered and ruled Spain. They kept the light burning in southern Europe. The word Moor means black, by the way. Again, this is in an interview with Playboy magazine, 1963. So in the 50s, he knows exactly who the Moors are. In 63, he knows exactly who the Moors are and what their history is, and the fact that they had an empire. And the fact that their history gets whitewashed a little bit. And then he goes on to say something extremely interesting. So look at these time periods. This is while he's incarcerated. This is during the height of him being with the NOI in 63. And then what I'm about to read now is after he left the NOI, went to Mecca, came back, and is literally right before he gets assassinated. This is January 24th, 1965. He gets assassinated next month. So he's left the NOI. He's started his own organization, two of them, one for Muslims and one for Pan-Africanism. And after he's done such, he with the Pan-African group. Again, y'all can see this. I'll show y'all real quick. So his Muslim group was the Muslim Mosque Incorporated, and his Pan-African group was the Organization of Afro-American Unity, right? And so while with the Organization of Afro-American Unity, he was given this speech here, and he said during this speech that it was going to be a series of 3 speeches, etc. Right? Now, again, this bleeds over into his assassination. He actually doesn't even get to complete his program that he sets out with these people, but his program is extremely interesting. In this speech, and during this time period, you can see when he comes back from Mecca, he breaks down the fact, like, you know what? I've been conversing with the African leaders now, and they've gamed me up to a couple of things. Now I know we need to go to the UN, and we need to go a particular kind of a way. And so he's talking about organizing and all that type of stuff. And this is what he says. This is a very interesting concept, right? I'm gonna read excerpts from the 65 from the speech from 65. Not the whole speech. I'll leave a link to it down below, but it's a huge speech. So I would bore everyone to death, and I'm probably reading you to sleep now, right? So if I read the whole thing, you would definitely be down for the count. But this is a real interesting concept. So again, in the first bit, while he's incarcerated, he's breaking down this concept of sleeping Moors, kidnapped Africans who were taught to glorify European accomplishments and then also believe that they were whitewashed. Then the second conversation in 63, he's breaking down the whitewashing, who got whitewashed, etc., blah blah blah, etc. And then naming the Moorish empire, civilization, and all that type of stuff, and why it got whitewashed. And now he's talking about something really intriguing in this part here. So please follow, because it's going to be a little long. But he starts talking about this concept of well, who are we? What are we? What are we going to get together as, etc. Right? And he says, but what basis are we going to get together on? We've got to get together on the same basis they got together. Italians got together because they were Italian. The Jews got together on the basis of being Jews. The Irish got together on the basis of being Irish. Now, what basis are you and I going to get together on? We've got to have some kind of basis. He goes on to say, the worst trick of all is when he names us Negro, talking about Europeans, and calls us Negro. And when we call ourselves that, we end up tricking ourselves. My brother Cassius, talking about Muhammad Ali, was on the screen the other night talking with Les Crane about the word Negro. I wish he wouldn't have gone so fast because he was in a position to have done a very good job. But he was right in saying that we're not Negroes and have never been until we were brought here and made into that. We were scientifically produced by the white man. Whenever you see somebody who calls himself a Negro, he's a product of Western civilization. Not only Western civilization, but Western crime. The Negro, Western crime. Think about that part, okay? The Negro, as he is called or calls himself in the West, is the best evidence that can be used against Western civilization today. Evidence in a crime. You see what I'm saying? One of the main reasons we are called Negro is so we won't know who we really are. And when you call yourself that, you don't know who you really are. You don't know what you are. You don't know where you come from. You don't know what is yours. As long as you call yourself a Negro, nothing is yours. No languages. You can't lay claim to any language, not even English. You mess it up. You can't lay claim to any name, any type of name that will identify you as something that you should be. You can't lay claim to any culture as long as you use the word Negro to identify yourself. It attaches you to nothing. It doesn't even identify your color. He goes on to say, if you talk about one of them, they call themselves white, don't they? Or they might call themselves Puerto Rican to identify themselves. Mind you, how they do this. When they call him a Puerto Rican, they're giving him a better name because there is a place called Puerto Rico. You know, it at least lets you know where he came from. So they'll say whites, Puerto Ricans, and Negroes. Pick up on that. That's the drag, brothers. White is legitimate. It means that that's what color they are. Puerto Rican tells you that there's something else. They came from somewhere else, but they're here now. Negro doesn't tell you anything. I mean nothing. Absolutely nothing. What do you identify it with? Tell me. Nothing. What do you attach it to? What do you attach to it? Nothing. It's completely in the middle of nowhere. And when you call yourself that, that's where you are, right in the middle of nowhere. It doesn't give you a language because there is no such thing as a Negro language. It doesn't give you a country because there is no such thing as a Negro country. It doesn't give you a culture. There is no such thing as a Negro culture. It doesn't exist. The land doesn't exist. The culture doesn't exist. The language doesn't exist. And the man doesn't exist. They take you out of existence by calling you a Negro. And you can walk around in front of them all day long and they act like they don't even see you because you made yourself non-existent. It's a person who has no history. And by having no history, he has no culture. Just as a tree without roots is dead, a people without history or cultural roots also becomes a dead people. And when you look at us, those of us who are called Negro, we're called that because we are like a dead people. We have nothing to identify ourselves as part of the human family. You take a tree, you can tell what kind of tree it is by looking at the leaves. If the leaves are gone, you can look at the bark and tell what kind it is. But when you find a tree with the leaves gone and the bark gone, everything gone, you call that a what? A stump. And you can't identify a stump as easily as you can identify a tree. And this is the position that you and I are in here in America. Formerly, we could be identified by the names we wore when we came here. When we were first brought here, we had different names. When we were first brought here, we had a different language. And these names in this language identified the culture that we were brought from, the land that we were brought from, and the land that we were brought from. And identifying that, we were able to point towards what we had produced, our net worth. But once our names were taken and our language was taken and our identity was destroyed and our roots were cut off with no history, we became like a stump, something dead, a twig over here in the Western Hemisphere. Anybody could step on us, trample upon us, or burn us, and there would be nothing that could be done about it. Those of you who are religious, who go to church, know there are stories in the Bible that can be used easily to pretty well tell the condition of the black man in America once he became a Negro. They refer to him in there as the lost sheep, meaning someone who is lost from his own kind, which is how you and I have been for the past 400 years. We have been in a land where we were not citizens, or in a land where they have treated us as strangers. They have another symbolic story in there called the dry bones. Many of you have gone to church Sunday after Sunday and got and you know the ghost they call it, right? The ghost they call it, excuse me, right? Got happy, right? When the old preacher started singing about dry bones, you'd knock over benches just because he was singing about those bones, them dry bones. I know how they say it, but you never could identify the symbolic meaning of those bones. How they were dead because they had been cut off from their own kind. Our people here in America have been in the same condition as those dry bones that you sit in church singing about. But you shed more tears over those dry bones than you shed over yourself. This is a strange thing, but it shows what happens to a people when they are cut off and stripped of everything, like you and I have been cut off and stripped of everything. We become a people like no other people, and we are a people like no other people. There's no other people on earth like you and me. We're unique. We're different. They say that we're Negro, and they say that Negro means black, yet they don't call all black people Negroes. You see the contradiction? Mind you, they say that we're Negro because Negro means black in Spanish, yet they don't call all black people Negroes. Something there doesn't add up. Now then, once you see that the condition that we're in is directly related to our lack of knowledge concerning the history of the black man, only then can you realize the importance of knowing something about the history of the black man. The black man's history, when you refer to him as the black man, you go way back. But when you refer to him as a Negro, you can only go as far back as the Negro goes. And when you go beyond the shores of America, you can't find a Negro. So if you go beyond the shores of America in history, looking for the history of a black man, and you're looking for him under the term Negro, you won't find him. He doesn't exist. You end up thinking that you didn't play any role in history. But if you want to take the time to do research for yourself, I think you'll find that on the African continent, there was always, prior to the discovery of America, there was always a higher level of history, rather a higher level of culture and civilization than that which existed in Europe at the same time. At least 5,000. Now, this part here should stand out to any Moorish American Muslim when I read this, because this reads almost directly like chapter 45 and a little bit like chapter 40, 47 or whatnot. But you'll hear what I'm talking about. At least 5,000 years ago, they had a black civilization in the Middle East called the Sumerians. Now, when they show you pictures of the Sumerians, they try and make you think that they were white people. But if you go and read some of the ancient manuscripts, or even read between the lines of some of the current writers, you'll find that the Sumerian civilization was a very dark-skinned civilization, and it existed prior even to the existence of the Babylonian Empire. Right in the same area where you find Iraq and the Tigris-Euphrates rivers there. It was the black-skinned people who lived there who had a high state of culture way back then. And at a time even beyond this, there was a black-skinned people in India who were black, just as black as you and I, called Dravidians. They inhabited the subcontinent of India even before the present people that you see living there today, and they had a high state of culture. The present people in India even looked upon them as gods. Most of their statues, if you'll notice, have pronounced African features. You go right to India today, in their religion, which is called Buddhism, they give all their Buddhas the image of a black man with his lips and his nose, and even show his hair all curled up on his head. They didn't curl it up. He was born that way. And these people lived in that area before the present people of India lived there. The black man lived in the Middle East before the present people who were now living there. And he had a high culture and a high civilization, to say nothing about the oldest civilization of all that he had in Egypt, along the banks of the Nile and in Carthage in Northwest Africa. Another part of the continent, and at a later date in Mali and in Ghana and Songhai and Moorish civilization. All of these civilizations existed on the African continent before America was discovered. Now, the black civilization that shook the white man up the most was the Egyptian civilization, and it was a black civilization. It was along the banks of the Nile, which runs through the heart of Africa. But again, this tricky white man, and he's tricky, mind you. When I say this, it's not a racist statement. Some of them might not be tricky, but all of them I've met are tricky. And his civilization shows his trickiness. this tricky white man was able to take the Egyptian civilization, write books about it, put pictures in those books, make movies for television and the theater so skillfully that he has even convinced other white people that the ancient Egyptians were white people themselves. They were Africans. They were as much African as you and I. He even gave the clue away when he made this movie King Solomon's Mines, and he showed the Watusis, with their black cells, and he outright admitted in there that they looked like the ancient pharaohs of ancient Egypt, which means that the white man himself, he knows that the black man had this high civilization in Egypt, whose remains today show the black man in that area had mastered mathematics, had mastered architecture, the science of building things, had even mastered astronomy. He goes on to say, also at that time, or a little later, was a civilization called the Moors. The Moors were also a dark-skinned people on the African continent who had a highly developed civilization. They were such magnificent warriors that they crossed the Straits of Gibraltar, and I think that the year 711, 8th century, conquered Portugal, what we today know as Portugal and Spain, and southern France, conquered it and ruled it for 700 years. And they admit that during this time period was and they admit that during this time Europe was in the Dark Ages, meaning darkness, ignorance, and it was the only light spot, the only light of learning that existed on the European continent at the time, where the universities that the Moors had erected in what we today know as Spain and Portugal. These were African universities that they set up in that area, and they ruled throughout that area up to a place known as Tours, where they were stopped by a Frenchman known in history as Charles Martel, or Charles the Hammer. He stopped the invasion of Africans, and these were Africans. They try to confuse you and me by calling them Moors, so you and I won't know what they were. But when you go home, look in the dictionary, look up the word Moor. It will tell you that Moor means black. Well, if Negro means black and Moor means black, then they're talking about the same people all the time. But they don't want you and me to know that we were warriors, that we conquered, that we had armies. They want you and me to think that we were always nonviolent and passive and peaceful and forgiving. Sure, we forgave our enemies in those days. After we killed them, we forgave them. That was from a speech on Afro-American history, 1965, January 24th. So in that, he's surmising, he's breaking down a whole bunch of things. Whole bunch of things. But he's breaking down, well, look, we're not Negro. That's not us. Trying to identify as that name, not a positive thing for us. Not going to get us where we're trying to go. We need to identify as something that has a history, a culture, all them kind of things there to it. He said Negro doesn't connect you to none of that kind of stuff, right? He's talking about Jews getting together based on being Jews, Irish getting together based on being Irish, Italians based on being Italian, etc. Right? So what are we going to get together on the basis of, right? And then he goes through this long concept of and breaking down our history to us. And he ends on the Moorish one. He ends on the Moorish one. So we all know during this time period, he wanted to go to the UN, etc. Right? That was what Malcolm was pushing. He wanted to do that for our people. And again, he was talking about like taking America, bringing them up on charges for a crime against humanity, against us as human beings. But he was running into an issue. He recognized, check this out, we're not actually citizens in this country. We got this whole Dred Scott thing popping off to where, you know what, we can't really, you know what I'm saying, go get satisfaction for what's been done to us. Not as Negroes. So he starts throwing out names of civilizations and people who we've been, so we can start connecting to names. Now, I'm not saying he's telling everyone to go connect to the name Moor. Me personally, I think he connected to that name. I think that's the name he connected to. And when you actually listen to people like Louis Farrakhan break down stuff like the fact that Malcolm X introduced Elijah Muhammad in a speech in New York, to where Elijah Muhammad told Malcolm X and everyone in attendance, including Farrakhan, to study Noble Drew Ali, and study Marcus Garvey and other people as well. But he said to study Drew Ali. I know that Malcolm wasn't unfamiliar with the concept of a Moorish nationality. And when he starts talking about empires and whatnot, I find that to be extremely interesting. You know what I'm saying? Because that's definitely the Moorish concept. But you can tell consistently, if nothing else, he breaks down this concept of understanding that in his mind, our people, he equates us as being kidnapped Africans and blinded Moors. You feel what I'm saying? This is how I believe he saw us. And again, he goes to the concept of whole black empires like the Moorish have been whitened to hide the fact that a great black empire had conquered a white empire even before America was discovered. The Moorish civilization, black Africans, conquered and ruled Spain. They kept the light burning in Southern Europe. The word Moor means black, by the way. He reiterates this again. And how does he reiterate it? I find this to be fascinating. It says they try to confuse you and me by calling them Moors so that you and I won't know what they were. But when you go home, look in the dictionary, look up the word Moor, Moor. It will tell you that Moor means black. Well, if Negro means black and Moor means black, then they're talking about the same people all the time. But they don't want you and me to know that we were warriors, etc. So again, he keeps in his mind, he makes the equation of us being Moors. That's how he sees us. That's how I'm seeing it. And what I find remarkable about that is how it actually lines up. The way he breaks down this breakdown here of civilizations, right? Going from Sumeria to India, to the Middle East, going back to Africa, whatnot. It's a very interesting breakdown. And him talking about this Negro concept, and him talking about this not being citizens concept, him talking about still being in slavery, etc. I find that to be very intriguing as a Moorish American Muslim, because it ties very, it's very in line with what is read in the Circle 7 Quran. So, for instance, in chapter 45, it breaks down the divine origin of the Asiatic nations. And it gives a very similar breakdown. It's a short chapter, so I'll read the whole thing. The fallen sons and daughters of the Asiatic nation of North America need to learn to love instead of hate, and to know their higher self and lower self. This is the uniting of the Holy Quran of Mecca for teaching and instructing all Moorish American Muslims, all Moorish Americans, etc. The key of civilization was and is in the hands of the Asiatic nations, the Moorish, who were ancient Moabites and the founders of the holy city of Mecca. The Egyptians, who were the Hammatites and of a direct descendant of Mitzrayim, the Arabians, the seed of Hagar, Japanese and Chinese, the Hindus of India, the descendants of the ancient Canaanites, Hittites, and Moabites of the land of Canaan, the Asiatic nations of North, South, and Central America, the Moorish Americans and Mexicans of North America, Brazilians, Argentinians, and Chileans in South America, Colombians, Nicaraguans, and the natives of San Salvador in Central America, etc. All of these are Muslims. The Turks are the true descendants of Hagar, who are the chief protectors of the Islamic creed of Mecca, beginning from Muhammad I, the founding of the uniting of Islam, by the command of the great universal God Allah. To me, that sounds really similar. And if you go back and read the whole speech, because I didn't read the whole speech, he actually gets into, I think he might even get a little bit more to the American civilizations. He might mention the Olmecs. I got to double check that one. It's a long speech, long speech. So if I didn't add that part, I apologize. But I will definitely link the full speech down below so you can see it. But again, for any Moorish American Muslim, the way he breaks down the speech is very similar to this chapter. And then he ends it on, or not ends it, but he breaks down something even more so. So in chapter 47, we talk about this concept of Egypt being the capital empire of the Dominion of Africa. So you see in his speech, he's talking about the African empire that was feared the most was the Egyptian, giving the primacy to them. right? So we do the same thing in the Circle 7 Quran. And what's interesting about that is we ended basically saying this whole concept of being Negro, black, and colored, right? Watch this. I'm gonna read this chapter for people who've never heard it before. For Moors, you already know what time it is, and everything's gonna jump out. You'll see how it matches up to what he was saying. It says, Egypt, the capital empire of the Dominion of Africa. The inhabitants of Africa are the descendants of the ancient Canaanites from the land of Canaan. Old man Cush and his family are the first inhabitants of Africa who came from the land of Canaan. His father Ham and his family were second. Then came the word Ethiopia, which means the demarcation line of the dominion of Amexem, the first true and divine name of Africa, the dividing of the land between the father and son. The dominion of Cush, northeast and southeast Africa, and northwest and southwest, was his father's dominion of Africa. In latter years, many of their brethren from Asia and the Holy Lands joined them. The Moabites from the land of Moab, who received permission from the pharaohs of Egypt to settle and inhabit northwest Africa. They were the founders and are the true possessors of the present Moroccan Empire, with their Canaanite, Hittite, and Amorite brethren who sojourned from the land of Canaan, seeking new homes. Their dominion and inhabitation extend from the northeast and southwest Africa across the great Atlantis, even unto the present North, South, and Central America, and also Mexico and the Atlantis Islands, before the great earthquake, which caused the great Atlantic Ocean. The river Nile was dredged and made by the ancient pharaohs of Egypt in order to trade with the surrounding kingdoms. Also, the Niger River was dredged by the great pharaoh of Egypt in those ancient days for trade, and it extends eastward from the river Nile, westward across the great Atlantic. It was used for trade and transportation. According to all true and divine records of the human race, there is no Negro, black, or colored race attached to the human family, because all the inhabitants of Africa were and are of the human race, descendants of the ancient Canaanite nation from the Holy Land of Canaan. What your ancient forefathers were, you are today without doubt or contradiction. There is no one who is able to change man from the descendant nature of his forefathers unless his power extends beyond the great universal creator Allah himself. These holy and divine laws are from the Prophet Noble Drew Ali, the founder of the Uniting of the Moorish Science Temple of America. These laws are to be strictly preserved by the members of the temples of the Moorish Science Temple of America, that they will learn to open their meetings and guide it according to the principles of love, truth, peace, freedom, and justice. Let me just jump down real quick because you'll catch this part here. The time has come when every nation must worship under his own vine and fig tree, and every tongue must confess his own. Through sin and disobedience, every nation has suffered slavery due to the fact that they honored not the creed and principles of their forefathers. That is why the nationality of the Moors was taken away from them in 1774, and the word Negro, black, and colored was given to the Asiatics of America, who were of Moorish descent, because they honored not the principles of their mother and father, and strayed after the gods of Europe, of whom they knew nothing. And we go on to say at the end of this, right? Come on, ye Asiatics of America, and hear the truth about your nationality and birthrights, because you are not Negroes. Because you are not Negroes. Learn of your forefathers' ancient and divine creed, that you will learn to love instead of hate. We are trying to uplift fallen humanity. Come and link yourselves with the family of nations. We honor all the true and divine prophets. That's the same thing that Malcolm was talking about, the family of nations. And we can't link, he says, we can't link ourselves to that family of nations as Negroes. Same thing that the prophet was talking about. So I'm not sitting here trying to tell you that Malcolm X was a secret Moorish American Muslim, none of that type of stuff. No. I'm saying that he was saying a very similar thing to Prophet Noble Drew Ali, and I give him high honor for that, right? In a sense to where he's saying we as a people need to galvanize nationally in one sense. And then even on a whole nother sense, he's recognizing the spiritual sense. Same thing like the prophet did, right? Same thing. And as a Moorish American Muslim, like, there's nothing about the program that Malcolm X brought that I can't get with in any way, shape, or form. A lot of people like to think that, oh, Moors are not pro-African. No. Nothing could be further from the truth. We're very pro-Africa. Again, Garvey is part of he's part of the tradition. He's canonized in the Moorish Science Temple of America. He's canonized in the Circle 7 Quran. You can see Marcus, yeah, Marcus Garvey's canonized there, right? He's the forerunner. He's the forerunner to the prophet. He's our John the Baptist in a sense, right? So Pan-Africanism is codified in the concept. So I call myself a Malcolm X Moore, 100%. Um, I pay homage to Malcolm X in a very deep way. Again, he's not my prophet, but he's definitely a personal hero of mine. And what I dig about his message is that it there's literally nothing about his message that he tried to employ in the latter stages of his life that goes against anything I believe is a Moorish American Muslim. So, as an American citizen, as a Pan Africanist, as a nationalist for his people, um, I truly admire the way Malcolm X got down um, throughout his whole life. There's nothing about his life I would take back. I don't agree with everything he did, but I personally learned a lot by watching and reading and studying about his life from beginning to end and seeing the full journey, the rise and fall and rise of a man. Um, just like you see with like King David in the Bible, for instance, right? It's a beautiful story. You learn, there's so many things you can take away and pull from it and put into your own personal life because you can see your personal failings and personal gains in that story. My man went from having family members killed, etc., having crosses burned on his lawn, etc. You know what I'm saying? Having experienced racism in schooling situations and all kind of stuff, right? Just coming up, period, right? To being a dope dealer, dealing with prostitutes, etc., going to jail, finding what he thought was the true path. That's a cold one. Finding what he thought was the true path, right? Then putting everything he had into that true path, and then being humbled when he found out that wasn't his true path, and that his true path cost him almost everything. Like there's so many things I pull away from him and from his life and from the story that I think a lot of people can take away from. But one thing that I think people overlook, and this is the emphasis of this video. One thing I think people overlook about his message was the crescendo of it all for him, in the sense to where I believe we are a people. I believe we are a unified people. I believe we are a unified people that come from multiple different civilizations back home. We are not Negroes. And like he says, we are sleeping Moors. That concept of being kidnapped Africans and sleeping Moors. After I joined the temple, I couldn't shake that statement. I read it and I couldn't shake it. It just got me. Because you can see from a young age all the way to the latter stages of his life that he's mindful of this full ma'afa that we went through. Like he sees the full extent of it the whole time. He's constantly mindful. It's something that's always on the horizon that he sees the whole time, and it shapes everything that he does. Everything that he does, to the point where he laid down his life believing in that cause and laid down his life for you and for me to have a better life. That's all he wanted, was for you, for me, for his wife, for his kids, and for him to have a better life. And was willing to fight in every way he thought honorable and moral. And refined his ways in doing so until the very end. I can't do nothing but give extreme high honors to that demonstration. I'm personally extremely grateful to the man. And I truly hope people study his history, study his writing, study his words, study his intentions, study what he wanted to do. Because there was a lot going on during the latter stages of his life that a lot of people didn't catch. A lot going on there, and a lot that can be gleaned from that. I'm not going to keep you all day. I could talk about Malcolm all day because he is truly a hero of mine. Truly, 100% truly a hero of mine. Um, his words are something I meditate on quite a bit. Um, his voice is something I listen to quite a bit. I listen to his speeches all the time because his again in his voice you hear nothing but 100% passion for his people and nothing less than his people rising together is satisfactory to him. That's to me that I noticed that as a child. The first time I heard Malcolm's voice talking, I was like, "Whoa, who is that dude?" Like it stood out to me. His fire and his love stood out to me. You could see it. You could see. I knew two things. I knew that he loved his people and he wouldn't let nobody hurt him. That he was like you'd have over his dead body. You know what I'm saying? You could feel that. He had this like fatherly figure about his people. You know what I'm saying? I respect that all day. Like I wish that more people of our generation and our lineage and people younger than us, right, would study his moves that he made in public. When I listen to a lot of people speaking today who are like rappers or musicians or actors or politicians or people who play sports, etc. When they speak in a public manner and they speak in a political manner, I'm not seeing uh, the same passion, and I'm definitely not seeing the same sharpness in terms of identifying problems and solutions. There's a bit of a lackadaisical mindset in terms of how people a big malaise in how people are dealing with this concept. Like, as a matter of fact, like he's talking about, it seems like the people got tricked. Like they fell for the okie doke. You know what I'm saying? That they fell for the trick. That everything's cool. Like, no, that they're Negroes and it's cool with no culture. That's he didn't die so that we could have this whole milk toast existence in America. You know what I'm saying? To where like Malcolm X did not die so he could be so we could be talking about Black Lives Matter in 2019. You know what I'm saying? Like there's something about the way we move now that's not like the way he moved. And I really ask people to study him and figure out the differences thereof. But on that, I'm gonna leave it at this. I personally appreciate his journey in identifying who he was, because me on a personal level, uh, I made the same connections to being Moorish, um, and it meant a lot to me that I saw him making the same connections. So to anybody who's Moorish and can appreciate that, that's what's up. To anybody who's not Moorish and can appreciate anything I said today, that's what's up. I appreciate your time and listening anyway. But with that, I'm going to say happy birthday to Malcolm X. Um, and much gratitude for your demonstration, everything that you did. And with that, I say peace and love.